I've been having a bit of a look through the old Star Trek chronology and having a look in relation to Strange New Worlds. Obviously with Captain Pike taking over the show and sending us out into the galaxy for a 5-year mission worth of journeys and adventures on the Enterprise, I thought I'd go back and have a look at some of the chronology, what happened to the Enterprise under his command. He did 2 5-year terms as captain of the Enterprise. What events happened in the original series? What events from Next Generation referred back to the era where Pike was in command? And what sort of things might we see in Strange New Worlds under Captain Pike? Star Trek Chronology's got a few little interesting tidbits there I've just read that I think you guys will be very interested to hear. So let's take a look through the timeline and the chronology of Star Trek and see how it might relate to Strange New Worlds. So I've put together this timeline for you guys. So let's start by breaking this up into the 5-year missions of the Enterprise. The first being under Captain Robert April, the second and the third being under the command of Chris Pike, and the fourth, obviously, and beyond, under the command of James Kirk. We're going to start this timeline off at 2245, which was the year that the Enterprise NCC 1701 was first commissioned to begin its journey into space for the Federation. And Captain Robert April served as the commander of the Enterprise for its first 5-year mission. And just so you can see where this kind of fits into Star Trek lore, the last couple of years of Robert April's term as the captain of the Enterprise, we saw in 2249 Spock as a young man entering Starfleet Academy, and the very year after, in 2250, James Kirk entered Starfleet Academy. And in 2251, Chris Pike took command of the Enterprise. So in terms of where this fits into the chronology, Pike took over the Enterprise in 2251. The incident at Talos 4 with the Talosians happened around about 2254. So this was kind of a good 3 years into Pike's first 5-year mission under his command on the Enterprise. Now, Spock didn't come on board the Enterprise until about 2253. And this was when Spock graduated from Starfleet Academy, and it seems like that Spock's first posting out of Starfleet Academy as a very young lieutenant was on board the Enterprise under the command of Captain Pike. And the very year after that, in 2254, is when Kirk graduated Starfleet Academy, and Kirk went off to become the tactical officer on board the USS Farragut. So Spock's on the Enterprise under Pike as the science officer. Kirk's leaving the Academy a year later, 2254, off to the Farragut to be the tactical officer on that ship. That same year was the Talos 4 incident with the Talosians, which we saw in the original series episode The Cage, which is about 2 years or so before season 1 of Discovery, in around 2256, 2257. So this is kind of at the beginning of Pike's second 5-year mission. So before we even see Pike come and join the crew of the Discovery in season 2 there, Pike's already been captain of the Enterprise for a good 5 years. Now we know if we scoot forward in the timeline, Kirk takes command of the Enterprise around 2264. And then say 2 years after that, after Pike has been promoted to a fleet captain, that's when Pike has his accident on board the Federation ship full of cadets, where he's exposed to lethal doses of radiation and he's hideously disfigured and ends up in the wheelchair and so forth. So based on the fact that we know that Kirk takes command in 2264, that sets up the fact that it is looking pretty good that Star Trek Strange New Worlds is going to take place probably between 2259 and 2264. So there's a good 5 years there in that date range bracket where we're probably going to see the voyages of the Enterprise under Pike during his second 5-year mission. I would think it's probably going to be unlikely that they're going to go backwards and start it from the beginning of Pike's journey. I would like to hope that we'll kind of pick up where they left off at the end of Discovery Season 2. Because the original Star Trek series, that kind of takes place between 2266 and about 2269. So it all has to happen before that. It has to happen before Kirk takes command. So what kind of things are we likely to see in Strange New Worlds that happen between 2259 and between 2264? Well, thanks, as I said before, we got the old Star Trek encyclopedia and we got the Star Trek chronology book. So we're going to have a bit of a skim through those and see what events of kind of note that have been mentioned in past episodes. And there's a couple there that are worth talking about that the writers of Strange New Worlds might delve into to give us a bit of a historical look back at events that were mentioned in original series and in Next Generation. Now, one piece of information that I happened to read, which takes place in the early 2260s, which would be right towards the end of Pike's 5-year mission on board the Enterprise. And this comes from Next Generation. And this is a really interesting one, guys. And I really hope they delve into this because it would really be fascinating viewing, I think. And that is, in the early 2260s, was when Guinan's homeworld was destroyed by the Borg. I think seeing Eloria, Guinan's homeworld, obviously we know they can't learn too much about the Borg because from the Federation's point of view, they didn't kind of learn about the Borg as a threat until Q-Who in Next Generation, when Q shot them into the Delta Quadrant to encounter the Borg. That was their first contact scenario with the Borg. So this would be an interesting one to see how it plays out, but it would be very interesting to see Guinan as a young girl. She's kind of like the Star Trek version of Yoda, so she's like meant to be like 300 years old or 400 years old or something. So I guess the question is, could we see a young Whoopi Goldberg kind of lookalike perhaps playing a younger version of Guinan in Strange New Worlds, and perhaps the Enterprise rescuing her and some other refugees perhaps from their world that is destroyed by the Borg? Maybe they could do it in a way where they say our world's been devastated, but they don't actually call them the Borg. They're not given a name perhaps, so that we can maintain canon there in terms of first contact. It would be a fascinating story to dig into Strange New Worlds. So you guys might remember this episode of Next Generation called Ensigns of Command, in which this episode, a race called the Sheliak is introduced. It would seem that this was kind of a big deal around the time of Strange New Worlds, because in the early to mid 2260s, which would be when Strange New Worlds is set, was in fact the last contact between the reclusive Sheliak corporate and the United Federation of Planets, where two parties agree to sign the Treaty of Amen's, in which the Federation succeeds the planet Tau Cygna 5 to the Sheliak. The treaty contains 500,000 words and took 372 Federation legal experts to draft. So this sounds like it was a pretty big deal. I remember this episode and the Sheliak being quite a powerful race, so it sort of seems like they had a lot to do with this race around early to mid 2260s. If they had to have over 300 legal experts draft this big treaty and everything, then it would seem like that this race, it was a big deal. When we hear Riker and Picard talking about the Sheliak in this Next Generation episode, the Federation had no contact with the Sheliak for 111 years. And it seemed like it was quite a big deal around the time when Pike would have been serving on board the Enterprise. So I wonder whether the Sheliak might enter into one of the stories. One thing we saw during this time was that actually Spock had a girlfriend, believe it or not, or someone who wanted to be involved with him romantically. And her name was Layla Kalomi. And this was in the episode This Side of Paradise, where Spock meets her on Earth and they form a bond, and she apparently wants a relationship with him, and they sort of have a bit of a thing, but it ends up being, can't work out because of him being all sort of Vulcan and emotionless. And a romantic relationship with Spock would be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, yeah, he's Vulcan, but he's also half human, so, they were certainly a little bit playing fast and loose in Discovery Season 2 with Spock's emotion or lack of emotion, or whether we see Spock and his love interest involved in Strange New Worlds. It's possible. It's established, it's in canon. But I think it would definitely be good to see Kirk on board the USS Farragut as the tactical officer. Maybe there's a little rendezvous between the Enterprise and the Farragut, and maybe Spock and Kirk meet for the first time. That would kind of be an interesting little dynamic, I think, to see. So do you guys think the show Strange New Worlds will reference some of these canon events that have occurred back in original series or Next Generation? Were there any events that I missed? Are there any important activities or events that happened in the Federation that you're aware of that might be worth an episode or two in Strange New Worlds? Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you thought. And as always, guys, please don't forget to subscribe, to like, to share, to check out merch, and to check out Patreon and all that sort of stuff. I really appreciate it. And I hope you've enjoyed my timeline of Star Trek and how that might relate to Strange New Worlds. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.